Okay, thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. So my name's Tom Ruggieri. Um, my wife, Rebecca Graff, and I, we run Fair Share Farm in Kearney, Missouri. We're just north of Kansas City. Um, that's Rebecca there on the right. Um, we have 140 member CSA. This is our 12th season of CSA farmers. We met at Piecework Farm in Newark, New York, and where Rebecca was apprenticing and I was a CSA member, and came back here to her family's farm. So her family's been on this land since the 1930s. We are renting about a 20-acre portion of the farm. The farm's about 260 acres. You can see the arrow there. That's our house. Just below it here is a greenhouse. That's where we start all our transplants. We have an old tobacco barn here. That's where we have our processing area, and we're building a commercial kitchen there right now. We have one high tunnel, and then you can see all our production fields here. We have maybe, depends on how you count it, somewhere around 5 acres in cultivation. This is an old irrigation pond that we used our first few years. It's probably 70 years old, 60 years old. And then over here, this is a newer pond that was built when we came back in 2006. And we have a solar panels there. We have a solar powered irrigation system that irrigates the entire vegetable production area. So I say we're a CSA farm. We grow the traditional, 40 different types of vegetables, from leafy greens to sweet potatoes. It's kind of warm down here, so we can grow things like sweet potatoes, okra, and the likes. Our CSA is a traditional model. Our members come out and they participate in the harvest. We have a core group, so our members, it's a participatory program. You can see here they're picking peas. The two of us and our two apprentices couldn't pick all those peas and still have time to do everything else we need to do, so our members come out and do it. Here's beans where they're helping, and members also help wash the vegetables on CSA mornings. And jobs like that are pretty easy to teach people. And we have food safety talk ahead of time, and yeah, it works really well. Kids can participate. We've had 3 generations of family out at the farm before, and that's not that unusual even. So as Steve said at the beginning, integration of cover crops into production planning and farm goals is part of what we're talking about. And so I kind of want to talk about that part of it, our farm goals, and why we're doing what we're doing. We're not certified organic. Our members come out and see and participate in what we're doing, so we really don't need a third person party to inspect us. So we use the word biological farming, which is what is used across a lot of the rest of the world. And what we try and tell people is that our approach is that we think of the soil as the plant's stomach. So the soil is alive, as most of you know, and as an organic farmer, it is your job to promote soil health. And just like a human, you don't want to feed it the same thing over and over again. And so we have we feed a lot of different things. So yeah, the soil, just like a person, takes in solid food. It decomposes and solubilizes the nutrients, so it can be taken up by the plant. And one kind of aspect of this that we feel is important is for people to realize that just as in our digestive system, there's a symbiotic relationship going on in the soil. So here's a picture. Here's a plant, and kind of an exploded view down here to a root hair. And you can see here that there are mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. A lot of you might be familiar with that. You have bacteria, you have worms, larger kind of critters in the soil food web, and one of the things you have are mycorrhizal fungi. And what they can do is they can actually penetrate into a root hair and form a relationship where the fungi, they can go out and get nutrients from a farther distance than just the root hairs can. So they can be bringing nutrients to the plant that it can't get otherwise. Meanwhile, the plant, you have up here, you have the part of the plant that's out in the sun. So you have it's in the light area, and photosynthesis is taking place, and sugars are being created, and they can be given to the fungus, which it can't do, and it gives the plant nutrients which it can't otherwise pick up. And so you have this nice symbiotic relationship, and both make out in the deal. Give this talk to school kids sometimes and show them this. You might be familiar with it. It's Avatar, and you can see here it's, you know, you have this alien being, and it forms a relationship with this flying creature by doing the same thing, really, kind of connecting to each other biologically, and the two become one. So that's science fiction, and this is real, and they both work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about feeding the soil, and I just wanted to show real quick basically what we do. So this is a rye vetch cover crop. We have a flail mower, and as an example of where we would mow down the cover crop, and then we would turn it in with a spader. I'll show you a picture of that near the end of the talk, and incorporate these cover crops. So in organic farming, some people say, you know, organic farmers, they just burn up the soil because they overtill. Well, what we do is we kind of call this a chewing step. So if you think of the soil as a living organism, you know, over time, naturally, all these plant matter would die and degrade and get taken into the soil. But what we're doing is we're kind of speeding that up. So this is how we feed the soil with our cover crops. So to kind of understand biological farming in this day and age, I think it's good to understand how it's different than chemical farming. So most people call conventional farming, we call it chemical farming to really differentiate it. In chemical farming, you're not feeding the soil, you're feeding the plant. And you're not only feeding the plant, you're feeding it synthetically produced chemicals, which is really dead matter. And you're bypassing the biology of the soil. So the way we like to look at it, to kind of give people an understanding, is that it's similar to being fed an IV instead of eating solid food. You know, a person could be alive, but are they really going to be as healthy as somebody that's eating solid food? The other thing about chemical farming is water quality. It can actually degrade both. To the soil, if any, even with no-till, you're really not having a lot of buildup if you take off all the crops. And water quality, you add water-soluble nutrients to the soil and you have a lot of rain, and it's going to end up down in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's inherently different. You know, there have been studies that have been done to say, well, the nutrition's the same, but the point is it's not, because they're completely different systems. So another way to look at it is like, why would you do that? Why would you farm biologically? And the way we see it is you are what you eat. That's pretty literal. It's hard to dispute that. And so therefore you are what your plants eat, because it's the same thing for them. So therefore whatever you feed your plants is what you're feeding yourself or feeding your customers. Another reason to farm biologically is that you do have soil and water quality improvements, and I'll show how our organic matter has improved. It promotes soil life. Another way to test for that is a new method called active carbon, and you can actually take carbon dioxide out of the air and sequester it in the soil, and you can be helping to minimize impact of climate change by actually removing carbon dioxide from the air. And the vegetables are more nutritious. You know, you can sample for a couple different things, but the fact of the matter is you are what you eat. And at least through what our members say, the vegetables are more flavorful. So carbon sequestration. So this is a little drawing. We're kind of happy at this point that we have 12, 13 years worth of data that we can talk about. Back when we started the farm, we got what was called a Small Farm Demonstration Award from the state of Missouri. They helped pay for our original cover crop seeds, a manure spreader, some compost, things like that to help us get started. So we knew what we wanted, that we wanted to do those things, and the grant and the cost share helped us there. It also paid for soil samples. So we started collecting soil samples. They helped pay for the first few years, and then we continued on our own to conduct soil sampling. We have a lot of different areas on the farm, so for a while we were sampling in the same place, and then after a while our production expanded and we added more areas to sample. So for this table, this column that I'm pointing to here, organic matter, it's an average. So say, like, look at the second line down even. The M, or the lab, there were different labs that we used. The M stands for Midwest. The organic matter is an average of those range of values. So you can see we had 3 samples. They range from 2.4 to 2.7% organic matter, and our average was 2.6. So this year, our numbers went up significantly. And so I thought I would go back through and compile all our data, and this is what we have. And so you can see over here in the graph, our first few years, the numbers just kind of bounced around. We were doing cover cropping, but the soil was still pretty dead. We had a lot of minerals we needed to add, pH adjustments and the like. And we were using more buckwheat than anything, it seemed, for some of our cover crops. And it doesn't add as much organic matter as others. And our organic matter even kind of took a little dip here. But since then, our soil became much more alive. We had much denser cover crop crops, and you can see that since 2008, we've pretty much had a steady trend of rising organic matter at the farm, to the point where the last few years we've crossed over the 3% and up into the 4% and close to 5%. So we see that as significant. And what that means is that we've actually taken and added carbon to the soil, and that carbon hasn't come from us buying something off site and putting it in the soil as much as it's come from us buying seeds and having it grow into plants that fix carbon and then put it in the soil. Another thing, there's a test that's kind of come into vogue right now. It's called active carbon. I used to be an environmental engineer, and we did a test called COD, chemical oxygen demand, and it's kind of the same thing. You add a permanganate solution to whatever it is you want to analyze, and the permanganate oxidizes whatever organic matter is readily available. So the permanganate is kind of indicated by the purple. So the samples here that have the most purple means that there's been the least amount of organic matter in there for the permanganate to oxidize. And this was at a soils class, and they just asked us to bring some samples in. So that was kind of interesting to do. 2 different samples from 2 different areas on our farm. It's a little cloudier because they mixed ours that day and the other ones had had a chance to settle, but they're essentially clear. Sample 1 and 2. The sample with the most organic matter was number 4, which was basically a forest floor, which you can imagine has a lot of carbon in it. And the number 3 was like a no-till area. So we feel good that tests like this can't lie, and that cover cropping does help to build active carbon too. Excuse me. So as the beginning slide said, we're talking about integrating cover crops into our plan. So there's other things that we do to feed the soil. We add hay, straw, compost. We have animal rotation. We add minerals. This is an example of putting down hay around our brassicas in the spring. It's a tedious process, but as you can see here, this is some kohlrabi. You know, the plants really love it. We started putting it down. Our soils are kind of heavy clay, and it actually helps not only in a dry period but a wet period. It prevents the soil from getting all compacted and blinded over. It provides a little canopy. You know, if you're an earthworm underneath that, you can come up, grab a piece of hay, go back down under the ground, leave those nutrients in the soil. So mulch is good, dry or wet. We buy compost. There's a facility near Kansas City that produces it. We make our own. We mainly use that in the greenhouse. We have chickens, laying flock, about 50 hens. We may increase that over the next few years to more like over 100. What we like to do, we've been doing the last few years, is by late April, early May, our spring cover crops have started to come up. These are peas and oats, and we run the chickens through there, and they just love these crops. You can see here, this is maybe 2 weeks later, and so we'll move them every 2 to 3 weeks, and basically they've done the digesting for us there, and it's healthy for them. We've also borrowed sheep from one of our fellow farmers and done some rotational grazing with small paddocks. We also use Fertrell fertilizer. It's a bagged fertilizer. You can see there, Super N. It's peanut meal, dehydrated chicken manure, so it's all natural, organic components. We've put down a lot of lime on our soil to bring up the calcium level as well as the pH. We're adding a lot of gypsum now. The pH has gotten a little high. Just to kind of add some sulfur to the soil also. So the mineral balance has been one thing that we've been working on a lot too. So cover crops. Looks like I got maybe not quite 10 minutes left here to talk. So you can see this is an example of late summer for us in a good year. And that's sorghum Sudan grass. And it'll grow really tall, and you can only imagine that if you cut that down and turn it under, that's a lot of biomass to add to your soil. Some of the different cover crops that we use. Yellow clover is the one perennial that we've used. We'll put it down in the spring one year and turn it in June of the following year. This is the best stand we've ever had. It was just a beautiful sight to see. The carrots we grew in this and beets in this area, we've never had a better crop. So it's nice to kind of see what you can maybe match to a cover crop. To us, it seems like carrots really like to follow yellow clover. So that's a perennial that we would plant in the spring. We might have a nurse crop along with it, oats or something, so it can get established because it's going to be in there a while. Our normal spring crop is oats and field peas. We're starting to grow more field peas just because you can actually harvest them and hand them out as like a salad green, and which is, you can kind of see the peas in here, which is kind of interesting to do with your CSA members, to get across this whole you are what you eat reality even a little bit more. So that's a good crop of oats. Might want to mention here that there's a nice book, Managing Cover Crops Profitably, by the Sustainable Ag Education Network through SARE, and you can look in a book like that and it'll tell you your seeding rates for some of these. I think with oats, normally we'd put down about a pound of oats per 1,000 square feet and maybe 2 pounds of peas, and we'll mix them together. You want to have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 25 or 30 to 1, so you want to have a legume in with your grain or your grass. That's normally what you want to do. So that's spring. Some people use chickweed vetch. I think Mark will talk to some about that. There's other spring crops that you might want to put in there. So buckwheat. Buckwheat is a crop that we use a lot of times through the year. You can put buckwheat down, it'll come up very quickly, it'll smother out weeds, It'll provide a lot of flowers for insects. And one thing with buckwheat, when we terminate it, a lot of times we won't mow it. It's very tender. We'll just turn it under. So it's nice like that too. It doesn't take a whole extra step out with your tractor or whatever you have to chop it up before you incorporate it. Versus like behind it there, that's the sorghum Sudan grass. It's like corn. You really have to chop that first. Crotalaria, which is also called sun hemp. So it's not a sunflower and it's not hemp, but that's what they call it. We just started using that last year and read up about it. It's one of the oldest cover crops used. It's been used in India thousands of years ago. So it's a nice legume, and it grows straight, straight up. It's not viney like hairy vetch or other ones, and so it kind of grows well with the Sudan grass in the summer. It's good for soil that really needs some work, and it can handle drought and hot weather. Here's an example of Sudan grass and cowpeas. You can't quite see the cowpeas. They'll vine up the Sudan grass a little bit, but this is a flail mower here, so we use that to chop it down. It does a nice job. Some people even just then use that as mulch. It kind of provides a nice mulch when you do that. We have one high tunnel, and we take the cover off every year and put a cover crop in it. We had to move a lot of dirt to build the high tunnel, and so we had some subsoil, and so this has really helped it over the years. We're finally kind of trying to get it where it's nice and alive for us. Winter rye and hairy vetch is what we use in the fall and in the winter. We try to have it in the ground before September 15th. Here's some like last year, probably right around this time, where the rye was pretty well established, and it's nice to see green areas like that when everything else is brown. We're in the middle of a SARE project. We had 36 inches of rain in 70 days this year, so we weren't able to do the rolling and crimping that's part of this project. But you can see here, we didn't buy a roller crimper. We simply take our flail mower and don't turn it on. It has a big roller on it anyway, and it'll roll down the cover crops, make a nice mat. The first year we did it, it was very wet and bindweed came through. So we weren't able to have a good year to do what we wanted to do, and then this year was a bust. So we're hoping next year we'll be able to do the main project, which is to build or use this, what's called a no-till planting aid. It was developed by Ron Morse at Virginia Tech. So building that was part of the project. So we trialed it just a little bit last year just to see that it works. And what you do is you roll down the crops, and then you can make these strips through your rolled down cover crops. And we have a 2-row transplanter, and the idea is then in the fall we'll come through and we can put our brassica transplants in there just by driving down the bed with the transplanter, and we won't have to spread mulch like we showed you in that first photograph. So again, the other thing to do is to chop it down and to use this spader. So this was a little video which won't run, but it should, you can kind of see those are shovels. They call it a spader or a digger, and it's kind of a reciprocating action, and it doesn't pulverize the soil like a tiller will. It'll actually, you could go out and spade your bed where you had your potatoes, and you can have potatoes that aren't even chopped when you go out there that come to the surface. So it's just it's better for the soil when it comes to tilling it, and that's kind of what it looks like on a good day. So it works pretty well. And yeah, we have a little motto: feed the soil, feed the people. I think it's a good approach to take. So I think that probably is about a half hour, and
All right. I think I'm up and running now, and just want to say thank you to PFI for inviting me to do this. And thanks for all you people attending. It's nice to see some familiar names out there listening in, watching. And and I hope people have lots of good questions. And I also want to say thanks for Tom for covering a lot of the theory through there, because now I get to just focus on a lot of the fun practice that we have been doing at Scattergood Friends School. And and let me see here. I got to orient myself. Just start with just a little bit about the school. I'm kind of in a fortunate position that I get to. I know my customers very well. It's a boarding school, so we all live together out here, and my market is essentially just the school at this point. We're not marketing outside, and and I take it really seriously. I try to grow as much food for our students as possible, and so that means extending the season and doing everything we can. Lots of storage crops and then just eating in season. So and like I said, I'm really lucky to be here and really love what I do. Here's just a sort of a map. This is what I have what I call my Bible, and it's my planting schedule book, and I carry it around with me all summer long because it tells me what to do and when to do it. And so I have a map on one side and a yearly calendar on the other side. And if you look at this, you'll see 4 different fields, and things to know is that the only flat ground we have is that red field. And each one of those color-coded sections is about 1.5 acres. And so that's the only flat part we have. And the blue field kind of fades to the top, and the green field does the same thing. The orange field fades to the bottom. So we're dealing with, and all the land here is it's considered highly erodible, and so we're dealing with some significant erosion issues, which is part of one of the reasons why I became really interested in cover cropping, and this is how, when we first started cover cropping, it was very primitive. We didn't have a lot of machinery, and this is what we did the first few years. And as you can guess, it wasn't very effective. Here we are throwing some oat seeds into what was left of our pumpkin patch. And we've upgraded a little bit. We do have a new tractor. This is an old picture, so we have a different tractor now. But we are pretty tiller dependent, which I feel horrible about. And it was nice to hear Tom. It makes me want to go out and get a spader. But we're pretty tiller dependent. And then something that's really changed how we approach cover cropping is the no-till drill we have on the right. And a friend of the school gave that to me about probably 8 years ago, and it's really changed everything that I've done. So it was just a really fortunate gift, and it's been my goal to use it well. Why do we use cover crops? Tom covered a lot of this. To add organic matter and fixed nitrogen is important. Protecting the soil, like I said, we have a lot of erosion potential. Like everyone else, I'm sure listening in, like I'm becoming increasingly aware of trying to maintain our pollinator populations, and I think having a lot of diversity blooming throughout the year is important. And then we feed our livestock, so we do have cattle, but I don't bring them up on the gardens. I just worry they're too heavy. But I will graze the sheep, pigs, and turkeys throughout the garden. And we have had laying flocks in the past too. So when we get chickens back, they'll be out on the garden too. We are certified organic through IDALS. And so, of course, we have to honor the set-aside period for a manure application. And and if you're certified organic, there's lots of record keeping that goes in, which is all good. I'm glad I have to keep those records, and it just makes me a better farmer. Here's the list of the main cover crops that we currently use, and I just wanted to splash this up here for now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, and what I'm going to do instead is go over some of the process on how I got to use these ones, and which includes a lot of mistakes and a lot of PFI sponsored trials. So I want to thank Practical Farmers again for just supporting us over the years and our various attempts at using cover crops. So I will come back to this, and we'll be able to talk about a lot of specifics here, but please bear with me. And sorry if you can't read this very well. It says interseeding chickling vetch and purple top turnips and sweet corn. So this isn't technically a cover crop, but it was my first attempt to really try to combine to plant crops to feed the soil, or in this case to feed the sheep, rather than to feed us. And the reason why I include this here is because it ended up, I learned a very valuable lesson. And so here you can see it was a pretty nice stand. We turned the sheep out in there. They ate the corn stubble and really enjoyed the smorgasbord of turnips and the vetch too. The problem with that, though, is that the following year we had a severe crop failure in all of our brassicas. We had black rot everywhere, and it really made me very, very careful on how I use any sort of brassica cover crop going forward. If I were to go back to that slide that had our sort of that Excel field map, you can see that our crop rotation is on there as well. And our basic rotation is that of those 4 plots, each year, one of those is exclusively in soil building cover crops, and then we follow that year with our heavy feeders, in which I've combined sweet corn, brassicas, and cucurbits. And then the year following that is nightshades primarily, and then after that are like legumes and greens and other miscellaneous things like that. So I kind of look at what crops need the most fertility right away, and then sort of decreasing fertility needs following that. And I wasn't paying close enough attention to when my brassicas were coming on, and you really got to break the disease cycle. So I wasn't doing that, and I learned my lesson. So now I don't use too many brassicas in my cover crops now. I will occasionally use some tillage radish. And here you can, this is an interesting project we did with PFI. We're looking at weed suppression the year after we planted this tillage radish. And it was just a beautiful stand of tillage radish. Go back here. And it was just solid and beautiful, and you can see how big the radishes got. And then the next year, the thing that I was most impressed with was just how beautiful, light, and wonderful the soil was after that. And I thought to myself, I could go out here with an earthway seeder and just push the seeder through this without tilling it at all. And I have since, I will pre-seed my first spring planting of peas with tillage radish. And I have 2 more years before brassicas will be there again. And our spring pea crop is not so great just because I'm really pushing the calendar to try to get peas to grow to fruit and be harvestable before students leave. So it's not too vital a crop for us. I'm always trying to push it though. So really it comes out to probably less than 2 or 3% of that bed. But I plant the tillage radish, and then the next spring I'll go out and I'll just push the earthway seeder. I used to do it with spinach too. Now I've had a lot of luck transplanting spinach, so I've even reduced the amount of space. But that's been a fun lesson learned. This was a similar one. This we were converting some pasture in order to get enough space in our gardens to devote 1/4 of it to cover crops each year. I needed to expand a little bit, so I took some land out of pasture, and PFI again sponsored a trial in which we looked at different cover crops to help suppress the pasture plants. And I wrote in here buckwheat. It turns out we didn't use buckwheat, but we did use tillage radish and hairy vetch and rye. And my big takeaway from this was that I really did not like rye. It became, here you can see that's a pretty nice stand of both those crops. But the rye the following spring really became a challenge for me, almost as much as the clovers and bromes and everything that had been in the pasture. So I really grew gun shy of using a cereal rye, and didn't use it again until just about a year ago. So, and I'll talk more about that later. Again, this is another failed trial, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about some successes somewhere along the line here. But this, I think I was at PFI conference talking to Gary Guthrie, and he's like, "Yeah, I plant buckwheat and red clover together, and it's really great. You let the buckwheat grow up and flower, and then you mow it down, and then the red clover becomes dominant." And I tried that 2 years in a row, and I just have not got that to work. I tried that in 12 and 13, and then I just didn't have time to do it lately, and I didn't have a success with it. So I just wanted to put that out there. What I found is that even like one year we didn't get a very good germination on the red clover, and I think it was a drought year. And then the following year we had a really nice germ on the red clover underneath the canopy of the buckwheat. But when it came time to mow the buckwheat, I don't know if just laying that buckwheat down on top of it or something just suppressed the red clover, and very little of it was able to grow through the buckwheat. So that was a disappointment. And I haven't really used red clover for much since. Like Tom, I wanted to do an experiment with rolling and crimping rye, but we don't have a roller crimper either. So a year ago I planted a really nice stand of rye, and I think if anybody, if you planted rye in 2014, you felt like a great farmer because it just looked beautiful last spring. And we just had a beautiful stand of rye, and instead of rolling crimping it, we had it sickle bar mowed, and it looks really good right here. And you'll see this is how it looked about midsummer. So at first the perennial weeds started coming through, the curly dock and some of the Canada thistle, and then lots of grasses blew in, and by the end there were very few areas that recommended to me that I should try this again. I did plant another big stand of rye this year just because I so loved seeing the rye last year that I thought, if for no other reason, it just made me feel so good just to see it. So now we're getting into some of the success stories that we've experienced. Again, a PFI trial, trialing a lot of different species to see what would work in a window after a spring cash crop, but before planted in a fall cash crop. So this is for farms that have really, intensively use their soil and gotta follow a cash crop with another cash crop. Is there something that you can put on the soil for from mid-June until the end of July and get some benefit from? So you can see the list of different things that we used, and I definitely had some in there that I liked and some others that I didn't like quite as much. And here it is growing, and I think on the far left, I think this is cowpeas, this is the millet, buckwheat of course, and sorghum Sudan grass. We tried some different combinations different years, so there may be, I think there's another one on here, and my experience with this is that it really reinforced for me the importance of buckwheat. And I didn't put this on my slide on why I use cover crops, but one important reason is for weed suppression. As Tom said, you don't get a lot of organic matter buildup from your buckwheat, but you do get a lot of nice blossoms, and the insect life really seems to love it, and it just really is, it germinates so fast and grows so thick that you really suppress weeds. So it just sort of reinforced, like we've always been using buckwheat, but it really reinforced for me that I try to have some buckwheat in flower on the farm pretty much all summer long. So I don't devote huge swaths of our land to buckwheat, but I do. I'll throw some into the drill, and maybe do like one pass with it and let that flower. And some people don't like buckwheat because, of course, it tends to the seeds become viable. It continues to flower, so you'll have like new flowers coming on while the old flowers are setting seeds, and there are viable seeds. So you could be just planting your next buckwheat crop. But I always tell people, if buckwheat is your worst weed, you're in really good shape. So count your blessings. One thing, that the millet stand there looks pretty good. I really did not enjoy the millet. I found that and I think it was Japanese millet that we used. It wasn't pearl millet. And my experience with that is that it just didn't grow rapidly enough or thick enough. There was just a lot of weeds mixed in there. And then there just didn't seem to be the volume of organic matter. It's a grass, it's not a legume, so you're not getting any nitrogen from it. So there just, there wasn't enough that it was offering me to try to keep doing it. The cowpeas had the advantage of being a legume, but again, they suffered from sort of tepid growth and really could not compete some of our weed pressure. So what I really liked, that's what's missing from this picture, is the sun hemp. So I'll go back to this picture. So this is sun hemp in these rows here. Let's get my arrow going. So here's the sun hemp, and that was really just a wonderful discovery. It just grew really quickly. It seemed to suppress weeds well. You get the nitrogen from it being a legume, and just has a lot to recommend it. Here's another trial. This was a SARE sponsored. We've been fortunate enough to get some SARE grants for teacher educator, and so they're small grants, but they're really helpful to us. And again, look at this as a map, and we have 2 years here, and up here in this brown section. So basically we're looking at whether green manures, which would be cover crops, could keep up with brown manures, which are animal products. And we're lucky enough to have livestock. We're trying to grow protein for our schools. So I had access to both composted and fresh animal manures. And a big question that we had in 2010 was, can cover crops keep up with particularly the nitrogen production that you get, or nitrogen addition that you get from the animal product. So the biology teacher at the time, she said she was doing a unit in experiment design. So she came up to me and asked me if there was something that I wanted to know that they could design an experiment for. And I said, yes, there is. I want to know if cover crops can keep up with manure application. So they designed this great experiment for us. Things to pay attention to. So this is 2012 on the top. There's the brown side. So it's basically divided into 4 zones. So looking from top to bottom, like beets grow in the easternmost, and then broccoli grows in the center, zucchini in the center west, and then we have a control section that gets neither cover crops nor animal products. So basically we're just kind of destroying this small portion of land. And then each year those things rotate. So if you come down here to 2013, you see how everything has moved down the line a little bit. And the first 2 years we did this, we started with oats and field peas. And that's what I was most comfortable with at the time. I really liked the fact that they winter killed. I think at that point we didn't have a bush hog, so I was just relying on the tiller to incorporate our cover crops, and it really wasn't enough. So we have since purchased a bush hog, which has really changed what we've been able to do too. And so the oats and field peas did fine for a year or two, and then we really started to see some lag on the green side. And interestingly, where we saw it most was in the zucchini crops. It seems like the cucumber beetles would attack them, and the plants just didn't have enough energy to sort of grow through that damage. So we ended up with, nearly 100% attrition on the green side, whereas the brown side, they got attacked by the cucumber beetles as well, but we're able to grow through that damage and still put on a productive crop. We also saw it. Oh, and most of the data collection we do for this is harvest data. So we count every zucchini, and here's the students setting it up for the first year. But we count every zucchini, we measure every broccoli, and we weigh the beets. We'll take a random 10-foot sample from each row and weigh the beets. So anyway, we saw that after the first 2 years that we started to see a lag in the green side. So I knew I had to change things. So I switched from doing a oats and field pea to oats and hairy vetch. And within 1 year, it seemed like their fertility rebounded and things started to catch back up. Here you see some of our manure application. So this is, direct and live manure application, both with our turkeys, and I think those are our rams there. We also have a manure spreader, and we'll clean out the barns and spread that on there too. And here at the bottom, you can see this is the control bed, and so this receives neither cover crops nor the animal product, and this land is sloping towards us. towards the bottom of the screen, and you can see the erosion there. Um, Interestingly, we haven't seen the huge lag in um, productivity that I would have expected after 5 years of doing this. So somehow that soil continues to regenerate itself, and it's probably getting a little bit of nutrient flowing downhill from the cover cropped area above it. If I had to do it over again, I might have designed it with the control at the top, but then that's where most of our foot traffic is. Um, I see this message from Laura. Mark, when do you plant the oats hairy vetch? I try to get them in usually by September 20th or so. Some last year, I think I got it in a little late. A lot of it winter killed. This year I have a beautiful vetch in the understory with the oats. The beautiful thing about the oats is that they winter kill, so you end up with a solid stand of vetch in the spring. I'll get to a picture of that pretty soon. And let me see. And when do you plow down the vetch and plant that area in the spring? It depends. So I use vetch all over the farm. Like that's my major cover crop now. And again, I'll speak more about this later. I think I want to keep moving on with some of these things. So if I haven't answered your question, Laura, at some point, ask it again, please. But a little worried about time. This is a trial that we're doing this year. We just planted it last month. And again, that is a map at the top. And so what we did is we planted 2 double rows of garlic. So the top and the bottom we planted at the same time, really early for us. September 10th we planted garlic, which just felt wrong, but we did it. And then I came in over here where it's green. I drilled in the oats right on top of that garlic. And the goal is to try to grow our mulch, because it seems like so often we either don't get a mulch on our garlic or it blows away because we're on the top of a hill and it just kind of, ends up in the neighboring county probably. So then I drilled oats in on top of the garlic, and I was checking it earlier this week, and it's grown about 20 inches since we planted it in early September, which I'm pretty impressed with. It's been a very warm fall, as I'm sure it has been for most of you, and so we got a lot of growth there. It'll be interesting to see how much of that really is productive later, or how much mat it really forms for us. The interesting thing was that not every garlic broke through the soil, and some of them that did break through the soil had really tall leaves, and some had short leaves. So I'm kind of curious to see. So obviously the oats did well with that early planting. The garlic may not have done so well, but I'm also holding out hope that some of that garlic just sat in the ground, sending out roots, not doing too much top growth. And then down the middle, we planted, all these were planted our more typical planting time, October 20th. And so we're going to see, we'll be able to compare an early planted garlic versus a late planted garlic. And then we're going to alternate no mulch and a straw mulch. So tune in next year and I'll let you know how that happens. But I would really love if we could grow our own mulch. And here it is now. So this is a picture taken probably about 10 days ago, and the oats in the foreground here are on top of garlic, and then you can see where it's bare earth. That's the October planting of garlic. Back on top is the September planting of garlic. And let me see. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what we currently use and why. And in the spring, we use quite a bit of chickweed vetch. I really like it. I use it on our asparagus crop. I kind of will mow or burn our asparagus and then drill the vetch right into that. If weed pressure is coming on, I will do a shallow tilling, just like an inch or so deep, and put the vetch down. And then the asparagus grows up through the vetch, and the vetch is feeding the asparagus. And for the first 5 weeks, it's pretty great to see it all happening. The last couple of weeks of harvest get to be sort of a challenge when the vetch has grown, mid-thigh tall, and it sort of becomes a hunt for jungle asparagus out there. So then I mow that down. One of the projects I didn't talk about is that we would then mow the vetch and the asparagus, do a shallow tilling, and then put soybeans in on that. And Andy Dunham has been doing that at Grinnell, and I think Ben Saunders has been doing that too. So I haven't had a lot of luck with it. I don't know if we just have too much weed pressure in our asparagus or what, but I haven't been able to get a rapid enough growth on our soybeans to really suppress the weed growth. So we do use chickling vetch there. I love chickling vetch. It's you can find organic seeds really easily. It's relatively cheap. And it germinates in really cool soil. So you can plant it just as early as you can get out there. So mid-March if you want. And it fixes nitrogen really quickly, like in under 50 days. It doesn't fix as much nitrogen as other legumes, but you can get something. So I often, if I don't have any hairy vetch in place, I will go out there and throw down some chickling vetch, especially preceding one of the heavy feeders like the sweet corn or the brassicas, something that's going to be planted, especially the cucurbits. A lot of our melons and squashes are planted pretty late, so often I can squeeze in a vetch planting before that. And hairy vetch, don't confuse that with, or chickling vetch, don't confuse it with hairy vetch like I just did. In the summer, primarily use oats and field peas, buckwheat, and sorghum Sudan grass, and I put sun hemp in parentheses because I would plant a lot more of it if it weren't so darn expensive. I really loved what we saw from it, but at this point I just can't justify the expense. It was nice when PFI paid for it, but now that it's on my budget, I don't know. I got to figure something else out. So the oats and field peas is really nice, clean, rapid growth, cheap, readily available, organic if you're certified organic. Buckwheat, same thing, cheap, organic, such rapid growth. Sorghum Sudan grass I fell in love with, and this we grow only on our fallow plot, so 1/4 of the garden that doesn't have any cash crops on it. And my goal with that is to sow it like the 3rd or 4th week of May, let it grow about mid-thigh high, and then we graze the sheep on it, mow it with the bush hog, and then it shoots up about 8 feet tall, and then we graze it again, mow it again, it shoots up another 8 feet. We've had 3 huge growth spurts from sorghum Sudan grass in our best season. It doesn't always do that, but when it works, it's pretty incredible. And as you can tell, we send a lot of our cover crops through livestock, so they're carrying some of it off in the form of muscle protein, but a lot of it they're leaving on the field. So I really love sorghum Sudan grass, and it just grows so thick it suppresses a lot of weeds, and you do get just lots and lots of regrowth. It's pretty phenomenal. The big challenge with it is incorporating it. So if you don't have a strong mower, whether it's a flail mower or a bush hog or something like that, you might want to steer away from it. It does winter kill though, but you'll still have a pretty strong mat. And then in the fall, I use a lot of oats and hairy vetch or oats and field peas, and that's primarily determined by what is going to be following it the following spring. So if something is going in early, like peas, lettuce, spinach, stuff like that, I don't want to have the vetch in the way. So I use field peas. I try to get them on a little bit earlier, by the end of August, maybe the first week of September, so they have time to fix some nitrogen, and then they kill over the winter, and I can go in there and till it and plant some of those early season things. If I don't need to plant that land until the 1st of June or the 2nd week of June, I might go with the hairy vetch and just get all that added nitrogen too. And you get a lot more organic matter from the hairy vetch. Again, the oats winter kill, so you're just left with a solid stand of vetch, which is nice to look at, and really, and pretty much for all of our cover crops, we let them flower. Like I want to, our cover crop bill is about 1/3 of what we pay for all of our seeds. And so I want to get a lot out of them. So I get a lot of volume, and I want to get some pollinator benefit as well. I see the questions here. Jake says, why mow the Sudan if it's grazed? the sheep don't love it, so I kind of got to force them a little bit, and they tend to walk all over it. And then it's a pretty ribby plant, so they'll kind of strip some of the leaves down. It just seems like we get better growth. It kind of knocks it all back down to a common growing point, and also it I think it grows more vertically after it's been mowed. Otherwise, it would grow like in the way that they knocked it. So it does add another tractor pass, but I would still recommend it. Here are some cover crops from this year. Interesting year in that we were able to get all of our cucurbits out really early. So, we grow lots of pumpkins and winter squash and stuff like that. So I was able to get it covered with oats and hairy vetch, which I feel really fortunate about because, again, going back to our crop rotation, the cucurbits follow our soil building year. So I look at that as an extraction year. Like we've hauled off a lot of 50-pound pumpkins and thousands of pounds of squash, and so we've extracted quite a bit from that soil. And I feel fortunate that this year we've actually able to replace it right away. So next year, tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that, potatoes will be growing here, and there'll be ample fertility just waiting for them. Can sorghum Sudan grass be hand mowed with a sharp scythe? Wow. I think I have no experience with that, but talking to people, it seems like you want to have a really solid stand of things. So I think it could be, especially if you let it begin to flower. It gets a little woodier then, which may help. I don't know. You're asking the wrong person. I don't have a lot of experience with that. Here you can see the hairy vetch growing in the oats. So again, the oats grow a lot quicker. They get a lot higher than the cereal rye would, but it is going to winter kill. And this is from a couple years ago, and these are 2 rows of potatoes, but so this is vetch that I'm pointing to here. So the oats have died. I'm just left with this solid stand of vetch, and this was really an accident. What had been here before was our squash crops, and just I was able to get in between the rows and plant this vetch and oats, and then it came up in the spring, and I was like, oh, I can put my potatoes in here, and I think it turned out. I enjoyed looking at it, especially I let the vetch flower so that it's just covered with purple flowers with the 2 rows of potatoes stretching down the middle. Really appreciated that. So we do graze our cover crops, and you can see in the foreground here, the sheep have been here, and already, I think this is probably 2 weeks ago, the oats started to grow back right away. And we're kind of paying attention to how the vetch behaves, if the hairy vetch is going to be able to endure that abuse and still grow back robustly. So we left a lot of this. We left a lot of it intact, so we didn't graze it at all. There are the sheep, and you can see they've eaten all the oats and they've left the vetch, and those oats have actually grown back a little bit already. I mentioned earlier that for the most part for years I was kind of shy about using ryegrass, but here is an example where I did plant it, and again last year I just really did my soul well to walk by that beautiful stand of ryegrass throughout the month of end of May and early June. So I planted some more this year. I don't know if I'm going to do the rolling crimping. I'm doing air quotes for that because we don't have a roller crimper, but I do have that stand of rye there, and then in the background is more oats. We're actually going to put some prairie strips up there. And getting towards the end here. So the resources. Tom had mentioned this managing cover crops profitably. This is you really got to get your hands on this. You don't even have to get your hands onto it because all these SARE titles are available PDFs for free online, and so do go to the SARE website and check all these out. And pretty much every publication they put out is really valuable. And then of course Practical Farmers of Iowa. They've been really supportive and just talking to farmers and finding out what people experimenting with and what works for them has just really been instrumental in my growth as a farmer. So I appreciate everything. If you're not a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, you need to, like, once you're done here, you need to get online and become a member, and then go to the conference, go to field days, talk to farmers, and just learn as much as you can. Let me see. So I want to go back to Laura's question. When do you plant the oats hairy vetch, and when do you plow down the vetch and plant the area in the spring? How much vetch growth is there by then? So ideally, I plant the vetch the end of August until about mid-September. I don't plant it after that because then it doesn't seem to get enough growth, and you're just hairy vetch, especially organic hairy vetch, is really expensive, and I won't plant it after, you know, September 20th for sure. And then if you know your crop rotation well and you know what's following it, you should be able to leave it in place until it really gets thigh high and starts to flower. I don't want it to set seeds, but I really want it to fix as much nitrogen as possible, and supplies, you know, the pollinators with you know, some good habitat as well. So it will take a little while for it to break down, so I would probably wouldn't plant into it right away. I'd probably try to factor in 10 days between incorporating it and planting, because you will have maybe too much organic matter present until it really starts to stabilize a little bit. But that's my goal, is to really put the hairy vetch in places where I won't have to plant too early. I'm also have a distinct advantage because my market, the school, is that I'm trying to grow a lot of stuff for the end of August, September. I'm not trying to be the first one at the farmer's market with, you know, carrots or tomatoes or anything like that. So I'm really focused on a sort of a late season market that way. So it gives me some advantages. And I have not used velvet beans. So if anybody else, feel free to chime in. And Steve, you need to direct me here. Like, can Tom just come back in and we can field questions, or how do we proceed?
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Mark. I was just going to say that anybody that's got questions, feel free to type them in the chat box here. Now's a great time for that. If you, Tom's still here with us, so if you have questions for either of these guys, they're both waiting for you. Looks like Ben's got a question. In the meantime, I was also going to say that Mark's talked quite a bit about the research that he's done with PFI, and it's part of our cooperators program. Mark's been really busy with our cooperators program, which is the on-farm research program we do with our members. And if you're interested in learning more about the cooperators program and looking through dozens or hundreds of research reports that we've done over the last 30 years, that's all on our website. I'll post a link here to that right now. But it looks like we've got a few more questions coming in. So, and I don't know what, it looks like we might have just lost Tom. Maybe he'll come back. But Mark, you might have to handle these on your own for a minute.
Sure. Okay, well, I see Ben's there. How much cover crop seed are you saving by using the drill? I bet that I could probably use 1/4 of what somebody who has to broadcast and then get a better stand from it. So, I mean, you'd have to pencil it out. It depends on how much you're cover cropping and how expensive your seeds are. But I think it would pencil out, especially if you could, you know, pick one up. Like, ours is small; it's just 5 foot across. And again, it was a gift. I mean, it was a great gift. But maybe people can buy a 6 or 8 footer out there that other people, you know, just isn't big enough for them. And I mean, you see how, like, we get some really beautiful stands of cover crops, and I attribute that to you know, some fortunate timing and some good machinery. Let me see, Jake, do either of you think no-tilling into cover crops has potential? What do you think will be some of the challenges? Well, we still have enough weed pressure. I think I didn't put that on my slide, like, why do we use cover crops, but weed control is really important. And you know, just, you know, nature abhors a vacuum, so you want to cover that up, or nature's going to cover it up for you. And I've really seen that. So our weed pressure has certainly gone down since we've started doing a lot of intensive cover cropping, but it's still there. And I just worry that if you try no-tilling into some of these covers, you're going to be, you know, battling weeds for quite a while. And also, like we do have that nice no-till drill, and I have used that for things like spinach and cilantro, and I've even used it for peas before. I can cover up some of the rows and do that. But for the most part, like we're on small enough scale that um, there aren't so many things that I'm planting that much of. It'd be an interesting trial. I think that if you're interested in it, you should propose it for a cooperators thing, and we could see.
Yeah, it looks like Tom's back with us now too. But one question I was thinking that we haven't really talked about is where you source your seeds. And Mark, you mentioned you spend about a third of your entire seed uh, costs on cover crop seeds. Could either of you talk a little bit about where you get your seeds and
Sure, I'll go first. Just I get most of my seeds now from Welter Seed and Honey Company in Onslow, Iowa, and they have a good source selection of organic seeds, and they pretty much have everything I'm looking for. On a rainy day, I can drive there pretty quickly. So I have purchased stuff from Albert Lee, and always have a good experience with them. And then I know PFI gets a lot of stuff from I forget what it's called, but out of Nebraska, like green covers, and again high quality seeds. But I stick with Welter.
Yeah, I guess I'm back online here, if you can hear me. We also get our seed from Welter. It is really nice to be able to have organic seed available. And so I see here there's a question too for me. What type of tractor are we using for the spader? We have tractor, we call it Grandpa. It was Rebecca's grandfather's tractor. It's a Farminar 504. It has about 45 horsepower, which is more or less what you need for the spader. So it's nice. It's an older tractor. It doesn't have a creeper gear, but we can slow it down to run the spader at a low enough ground speed that it works well. So this.
well, it looks like okay. Carl's got a question.
Okay, were you able to hear me on that last one, Steve?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, we can hear you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Tom.
that's okay. Um, who supplies the spaders? Um, I'd have to go back and look in our files. We got our spader back in 2003. I think BDI was actually the name of the company. Ours is a Tortella. They're different models. I think most of them come from Italy, which we kind of like. It's kind of fun having it. Being Italian, it's nice to have an Italian piece of equipment for a small farm. We were able to get ours at a decent price. It was like a floor model, um, but I believe BDI is where we got ours. And I think Karen, Mark there has had decent experience with the Dicons. We've used them a little bit, and we have some out there this year. Um, and I think I would agree with Mark with all these brassicas, even if you use like Barnapoli, which is like canola, you have to be careful in mixing brassica cover crops into your rotations, so you don't have follow a brassica with a brassica with a brassica if you're doing that type of thing.
I'll just chime in that if you identify a purpose or need for the tillage radish, it's pretty remarkable just to see the top growth, and then to see the holes in the spring where the rotted roots were. It's really fun to grow. Some people complain about the smell in the spring or in the late winter, but if you can make it work in your rotation and you have an identifiable need, whether you want it to, break up hardpan, or like we use it to essentially do a winter till for us on those really early season crops. Um, if you can make that all work, then I would say give it a try.
Um, so the need to inoculate, um, some people say that the um, bacteria are already in the soil and you don't need them, but uh, you can't help but improve your ability to fix nitrogen if you're inoculating your crops. And you can talk to Welter or wherever you get your seeds to make sure you get the right um, inoculant for whatever crop you're using. Peas take something different than like a sun hemp, and so you have to figure out that you get the proper inoculant. And the benefits of the spader over a regular field cultivator, it's not as much that we use it to cultivate as we use it to incorporate cover crops. So if something kind of goes wrong, we might use it to kind of till up a bunch of weeds, but for the most part we're using it to dig in cover crops and incorporate crops into the soil. And the fact that it's digging is it's less damaging to the soil structure. It's also less damaging to worms and insects and other things in the soil. So I know that in the Managing Cover Crops Profitably and other SARE publications, they say that it really is the preferred method of incorporating crops.
I'll just add in terms of the inoculant is that I always try to. I usually just throw it in dry and just hope that it spreads itself out. And then sometimes I don't get it tossed in, and or I'm using old seeds and don't have new inoculant. So um, I know for sure that if you don't put the seeds in the ground, they won't grow. And and I do believe the inoculant will help. The inoculant will help, but don't use your lack of comfort with an inoculant to talk you out of using cover crops. Just get the seeds in the ground. Chickling vetch flowering in the spring. Usually I get it seeded probably mid-March, and I think it's flowering for sure by 1st of June. I'm trying to remember just in terms of our asparagus harvest because that's when we really see it. So a few flowers probably early June, and then by mid-June like full flower. Beautiful flowers too. Lots of like lavenders, blues, whites. Um, it's a nice plant. We In that quick turnaround cover crops, we tried that one year, and it was a really disappointing summer cover crop. So once the soils warm up, you wanted to choose a different legume. It's really most effective in those really cool early spring soils, and it was a little disappointing in the summer because we were trying to squeeze in these cover crops into like a 50-day window, and it seemed like, oh, this should be a good one, but it doesn't like that heat.
Brent, we've used chickling vetch also, and we're a little farther south, so we tend to get our cover crops um, flowering and coming to maturity more in late May. So it's just a little bit earlier than what Mark was talking about.
I see Ben's question. I have not mowed chickling vetch except for to kill it, so I suspect it would not grow back if that's what you're asking. Um, Yeah, that's just a guess though. I haven't mowed it with the intent of seeing it grow back.
So I haven't done that either, but it's a good point, Ben, that some crops you can grow or mow and they will grow back, and in doing that you will increase the root mass. So you look at a cover crop and um, they're only annuals, but you will have a large amount of root mass that mirrors to some respect the top growth. Something like Sudan grass, you can graze it or mow it like Mark was saying, and you just get larger and larger root mass, which is just good for the soil. So mowing can be beneficial.
We do not graze cattle on the rye. Just I keep the cattle off the garden. It just the compaction issues worry me a little bit too much, and uh, and again we're dealing with like including buffers and stuff, just 10 acres. Like the garden itself is only 6 acres, so the amount of rye that we have in is probably less than a quarter acre. So it wouldn't be worth bringing out our cow herd up to do that.
And Brent, we don't have cattle either to graze on rye, but we do graze our chickens. One thing, um, if you read when we get the Sudan grass, and Mark, you might know more about this since you do more grazing. I guess if you graze at the wrong time, um, it can be damaging to the animals because of some of the chemicals that are in it at a certain part of its growth. So you have to be careful with the Sudan grass as far as grazing.
Yeah, and that's I think it's prussic acid poisoning, and it is you don't want to graze it until it's thigh high, and then you don't want to graze it soon after a frost either. So we will graze the sheep. The sheep don't love it, but I think the cows would love it. But again, we don't bring the cows up to the garden. But we really try to be careful about that. Um, so again, thigh high, at least thigh high, and then not directly after a frost. Once it's once it's dried down after a killing frost, then you can go in there and the sheep can eat it. But not until you're sure that the plant is really dead. Otherwise, the prussic acid can sort of concentrate in the if there's any green growth that's still like at the base of the plant. Apparently, it concentrates in there and can cause some trouble.
Um, I guess I'm not sure of the question as far as harrowing it. Um, do you mean to incorporate it in the spring or to try and weed it? Um, I don't know. If you have a good stand of rye and it came up in the fall, it should pretty much have everything smothered out. So hopefully you wouldn't have many weeds in the spring. Mark might be able to talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I'll just add my experience with almost all cover crops is plant them really densely, especially if you want to control that weed growth. So that's been my experience with the rye as well, is that and I feel like I'm a rye neophyte. Like I don't have a lot of experience with it, and like I said, for years it scared me just because it was such a challenge to deal with the following spring. So I'm really just getting back into it, and it's more an aesthetic decision as much as I don't know, a soil feeding decision. And so I haven't done what you're suggesting here. Um, but again, if you think it might work, propose it, and maybe we can get farmers across the state trying it, and maybe it will be the next the next best thing.
Well, it looks like we have kind of exhausted our Q&A so far at this point, so I think this might be a better time than any to call it a night. I want to say a big thank you to Mark and to Tom for taking the time to talk to us about their cover crop practices. Really great job, guys. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for coming with their great questions and being attentive and inquisitive. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I'm putting my email in here, so feel free to get in touch. Thanks, Tom. That was great.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Steve and PFI for doing this.